Hi, Changeling fans, Puka here. A few quick notes as we enter this third and final episode for our trilogy covering the C20 corebook. First, we ought to make clear that although this episode is about changes in the new edition, and we have mixed opinions about those, we are 100% not here for edition wars. After 80 plus episodes on the first and second editions, we feel that there are valuable elements from the entire history of Changeling to appreciate and highlight, and we want to make that clear before launching into what we hope are lovingly constructive criticisms. Second, we've been referencing the Changeling 30th Anniversary project here and there. If you're new to our podcast, this involves a stack of homebrew books we're producing for 2025. You can find out more by going to www.changeling30.com. One of these is the Changeling Cookbook, for which we are still accepting recipe submissions until June 1st. Links to both will be provided in the show notes to this episode. And lastly, I was fending off the beginnings of a wicked cold while recording this one, so apologies for sounding at points like I have the weight of the world of darkness upon my sinuses. This may also be apparent for another episode or two with regrets. Thanks bunches, and now the episode. This is Changeling the Podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the Podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibes. I'm your host, Josh, and with us is your other host, Puka. Say hi, Puka.
Salutations.
What are we talking about today, Puka?
It is time for the third and final installment of our trilogy of episodes on the Changeling 20th Anniversary corebook, wherein we will be talking about changes in this edition. The big ones, anyway, or important ones. Noticeable ones?
Yes. We're not going to talk about all of them because
There's a lot.
that would be like 3 seasons worth, probably, of just...
That's a separate podcast.
Yeah, Changeling 20th Edition Core Book, the podcast.
But there are overall, I think we talked about in our first episode in this three-parter about just sort of the general change in spirit, I don't know what to call it, of the edition, and sort of how it refocuses on the individual character, I would say, and, you know, like that kind of propagates out to a lot of the other shifts that we see. But then there are specific mechanical things and setting things.
Can we actually, we didn't discuss this, can we briefly just talk about the structure of this book? Because that is different too, and I think it's...
Oh, that's fair, yeah.
Yeah. So this, first of all, there's a bajillion people worked on this. Like
a metric bajillion.
Yeah, we're not going to list it all. Also, there's a whole bunch of credits and dedications and like quotes from people who backed on the thing, which is really nice. Is both on the one hand really nice, and on the other hand, takes you forever to find the freaking table of contents. But that's like all the 20th anniversaries do. And if you got the deluxe one, it has like 3 ribbons, which is really handy. Also, it's broken into 3 books: Childling, Wilder, Grump. So, and then the chapters are throughout. I just thought
the chapters are in a slightly different order too from second edition. I think the Cathane section comes earlier. I don't know. Like a lot of stuff has been sort of shifted around.
Yeah,
but not too terribly, I guess. Just
no. I think it makes sense for the most part.
Oh yeah, for sure.
The biggest thing is the like sort of near the end. There's a lot of like, this is a giant appendix, even though it's not.
Yeah, there is that. But we talked about that 2 episodes ago.
Yeah.
But we have a short list of 12, maybe 13 changes that we're going to go through in book order. I guess we can give like page references for some of these too, but
yeah. So do we want to start first? What do we want to start with first?
So first on the list that I have is Fragments of the Dreaming's Heart / Chimera in general, and the nature of Chimera. And I'm just going to read this paragraph from page 33 to open. So, Fragments of the Dreaming's Heart. Items brimming with so much glamour that they exist in the autumn world without a mundane counterpart lack description in fairy vocabulary. Changelings often give the items names and apply "of the Dreaming's Heart" as an epithet. While scholars of magic and chimera among the Kithane have all manner of theories as to what such objects might portend and how best to create or maintain them, most Fae accept them at face value for the wondrous items that they are. What makes them remarkable is that they affect the mundane world and operate on the same principles that conflicts between the chimerical and mundane do.
Mhm.
So I think we might have different takes on this piece
Yeah.
and what it means for Chimera in general. But I wanted to hear what your take on it is
So
first.
so this is one of those, is this even a change? It is and it isn't,
Mm,
because this is not new to Changeling, but I would say before C20 there were many different inconsistent takes sometimes in the same book on how Chimera, and it's not like this is fully consistent either, but they didn't have the term fragments of the Dreaming's Heart. They definitely had
right.
Chimera that had no physical equivalent, and sometimes would interact with the mundane world without use of reeds, and sometimes the descriptions made it sound like they didn't.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. I would point also to, I mean, just above that passage is this section on the importance of intent. When they've consolidated what Chimera are and how they function in this edition, I think it really keeps pointing back to that in the sense
mhm.
of those earlier inconsistencies. It was never spelled out that they could be resolved by the importance of intent, but now it
Yeah.
is. So that does help, I would say.
And the important thing is, okay, so previously sometimes it was portrayed as like an insubstantial thing from the, like, you have the mundane world and the chimerical world, and the chimerical things are like spiritual, not spirits because that's its own meaning of world of
separate
darkness, which is
separate game.
spirits and chronicles of darkness is what it was more like. But like, an insubstantial thing that,
Yeah.
and now it's not saying that. It's simply a thing that's, yeah, it's about intent. So like, you don't have the second edition thing where the troll gets a banality trigger when they walk through a door without ducking. Now it's, you just walk through the door, even if your height would be.
To be fair, I don't think second edition ever said that that was like an ironclad thing. I think it was a reference made once, and people just
Yeah,
people ran
they
with
did
it.
give it as an example though in the core book.
Yeah,
So at least the examples in focus are different. I don't think it's an entire massive swing, because I mean, there's still things like, okay, a chimerical sword will not stab a mortal who's unenchanted.
yeah. What
Yeah.
seems clear from this passage is that the chimera that can influence the mundane world are a subclass that are rare and special, and that's good to have that spelled out and delineated
Hmm.
because it wasn't before.
Yeah, but it's specifically the chimera that have no physical item are the
Yeah,
special ones. So
yeah.
like a,
Because otherwise they'd be treasures.
yeah, so like a umbrella sword is just an umbrella from a mundane perspective, but a purely chimerical sword is a fragment of the Dreaming's Heart sword.
If it can affect the mundane world. Because you could have a chimerical sword without a mundane counterpart that doesn't affect the mundane world too. That's how I read
I
it.
don't think so.
So,
Yeah.
all right, here's all of the breakdown of chimera the way that I see it
Yeah.
from my read here. You have chimera which have no counterpart in the mundane world, and chimera that do. So this is the difference between the finger gun and the stick as a sword.
Hmm.
And then of the chimera that have no mundane counterpart. So if that finger gun could actually shoot some, probably not someone, because then a mortal would be paying attention, but if that
Yeah.
chimerical gun could shoot off a lock from a door or something, then that would
Yeah.
be of the Dreaming's Heart. That's how
Well, I
I.
think I get the impression anything, if it's not of the Dreaming's Heart, it cannot. It needs a mundane equivalent. Is how I read this.
Well, I wouldn't say it needs one, but it definitely can't
Yeah.
affect the real world unless
Yeah.
it either has that or the weird read.
Yeah. It says items bringing with so much language that exist in the autumn world of a mundane kind of court lack description. Yeah. So I take this as, if it doesn't have a mundane equivalent, it is of the Dreaming's Heart. Is how I'm reading this paragraph.
Well, so there's another line on. I wrote this down somewhere. Page 300, there's a bit where it says, Chimera cannot affect the mundane world except under special circumstances, which is also part of why the weird read exists. And then
Mm-hmm.
on this same page with Fragments of the Dreaming's Heart, they have the example where it says, a beast can walk the streets unburdened by the mundane world and only affected through its chimerical quality. So both of those passages suggest to me that you have these insubstantial, to the mundane eye, chimera that changelings can perceive and interact with, but they have no mundane equivalent and have no impact on the mundane world.
Wait, page 300 doesn't. That's not right.
Um, Hang on, let me search.
We both agree this is far too important to have been described in a confusing way here, but
Yes.
that's not new to this edition of Changeling.
I think we need a graphic or something to kind of hash it out.
Because everything around page 300 is just talking about the dreaming.
Sorry, 315. I apologize. The full paragraph is, what exactly comprises chimera is an enigma. Though many Fae have made a study of dream stuff, all but the most basic properties escape definition.
Yeah.
Changelings can't even be certain that Chimera are, in fact, real. Though the Fae and the Enchanted can observe Chimera with all 5 senses, Chimera cannot affect the mundane world except under special circumstances.
Yep.
There's also given how many people worked on this, it's possible that these are just 2 different interpretations.
That's my take on it. So that's
Maybe I'll include my own graphic in the show notes for this episode just to kind of lay out how I think. But anyway, this is a significant, not change necessarily, but significant recategorization of different types of Chimera.
Yeah, let's talk about the spoon. I think if it has no mundane equivalent, you can use it as a spoon, if it's a spoon. But
Well, I like that too, but I don't think this edition wants you to do that unless it's a spoon of the Dreaming's heart.
yeah. But anyway, let's move on because
the next one's the big ones.
Yeah.
Or one of the big ones.
Evanescence metaplot. Well, I don't think we disagree on this one.
Should we give some background on what it used to be?
Yeah.
All right. I think we've talked about this before, but as a reminder, back in the beginning of Revised Edition Vampire the Masquerade, there was a big cross-line event called the Week of Nightmares.
Mm-hmm.
Backstory to this is that vampires, as they get older, end up needing to eat other vampires. And those who believe in the progenitors of their clans, called the Antediluvians, are generally terrified of their eventual awakening because such ancient vampires would just need to eat all of the other ones. And that event in their lore is called Gehenna. So in 1999, Ravana, the progenitor of the Ravnos clan, rose in India and slaughtered its way across the subcontinent before eventually being destroyed by some elder Kuei-jin, kindred of the East, and the Technocracy, the former using a cyclone and the latter using a combination of spirit nukes and giant mirrors that reflected the sun. So there were a lot of consequences from the destruction of the Antediluvian.
And just to be clear, Mage fans, this has nothing to do with the Avatar storm. Very confusing.
Well, depending where you read, it may or may not. Inconsistency, imagine that.
Mm-hmm.
But other effects are that mortals around the world suffered from panic and visions and nightmares for days because Ravana was connected to the Dreaming. The Ravnos clan had a discipline where they could actually manifest Chimera in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
There was also mass destruction in Northeast India and Bangladesh.
Yep.
The Avatar Storm, the Sixth Great Maelstrom, all of those things may have been involved. The Hunters becoming imbued, the Fallen stirring to wakefulness. But notably for Changelings, trods to deep and dark parts of the Dreaming were reopened, bringing back the denizens, as well as many Thalane, and the lost houses. Over all of that, the mysterious evil Red Star, which the Changelings called the Eye of Balor, following the mythology of that Fomorian, appeared in the sky to herald the end times. So that's the original metaplot.
Yeah. The new one is 9/11.
Yeah. Well, and interestingly, in the other lines, because Mage, I think, still allows the option of that whole story, right? Like, that's still a possible...
And then I think Vampire just kept it, and I don't know what Wraith did. And
yeah. I know Vampire 5th edition has retconned it into being not a week, but like a years-long kind of event.
Oh, they made it bigger. Okay.
Like longer, but less intense or something.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, but it wasn't 9/11.
But it wasn't 9/11. Yeah, and so Changeling argues that 9/11's dark glamour functioned like an inverse of the resurgence to blow open all those trods.
I
Yeah, it sounds like you have thoughts.
Okay, I get like the game centers on Concordia and specifically the US, but this is supposed to be a global thing. And it was still a global event, but I wouldn't put it as like the defining thing over a generation or more is what it like this whole thing's supposed to be like a huge deal, like so much more. And I'm like, did World War II not do that? Did like a whole bunch of other events not? Why this one? Like,
I need to preface my own thoughts by saying that obviously, you know, having been not far from where it happened and being, you know,
well, yeah, I'm not saying it should have had no effect on the setting, but like the scale of it, I don't. Yeah.
When you point to it being a global event, I wonder if maybe that's like the easy fix is to say, yeah, the Evanescence happened, but outside of the Kithane sphere, maybe a lot of the other Fae didn't really, you know, they weren't impacted that much until later when maybe the Thalane and the other whoever had kind of
Mm-hmm.
percolated through the world.
But even Europe, that's the thing. Like,
Maybe it's just because it was televised. I don't know.
yeah.
So I understand why they might have wanted to decouple the Evanescence from the Week of Nightmares, because obviously that piece of lore had become much less robust when they wound back the apocalypse. But
Yeah.
the opinions that people have about it, people get so dug in on this issue, like both about the original Week of Nightmares and about the replacement,
Mm-hmm.
partially for some of the reasons you like, for it being US centric or whatever. But I don't know what the experience was like for you, but to me, the world very noticeably and tangibly changed before and after. And I don't just
Mm.
mean in the sense of like, oh, it was a crack in the illusion of American invulnerability or anything. I mean, like, travel got weirder. The way that data moved through the world got weirder.
Yeah.
And I don't know that those things are enough to justify the Evanescence as written here, but it
Well,
certainly.
the U.S. response to it, I could see as
Exactly.
being a
Yeah,
big part of it.
exactly.
Like the war on terror and all that stuff, I think had a
Hmm.
bigger impact than the initial thing. But then it should have been it should have been like it was the start of the cracking open, and then by like 2005, it was. Yeah.
I think that's, again, another easy fix that they could have
Mm-hmm.
made. And it certainly points to symbolic weight mattering more than like body count, because otherwise you could say like, okay, well, what about the tsunami in 2004, which killed like 250,000 people? Like,
Yeah.
why wouldn't that be a big deal? So I don't envy the challenge that they had to
Mm-hmm.
make this work, but it does feel very clunky the way that it's kind of
Yeah. It
constructed.
does make me want to try to tie in the musical "Come From Away" into somehow the Thaling or the Denizens, but.
A lot of people have said that musical's really good, and I've walked past the theater many times, and just
Mm.
every time I'm like, who would go see this? But apparently it's really good. So,
I haven't seen it, and I want to see it, but I'm also like, I don't like listening to the musical before I go to it. That's part of my thing.
mm.
But also, like, it's, I don't know, a musical about Gander, Newfoundland, I find
Yeah.
hilarious. So,
I mean, I had friends that like were in tears from it, so I guess it's
hmm,
really good.
yep.
So, anyway, the concluding thought I have on all of that is just, as much as I understand people's frustrations with the way that this shook out in the book, it's
Hmm.
kind of like don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, you know? That's
Yep.
my take on it.
I don't think either the original one or this change was the
Mm.
best, I think. And I think there could have been a better option, but I don't have it, so maybe I should.
Who does, really?
Yeah.
Um, anyway,
The next one I think we're in agreement with.
no, this is the meta plot about rulers.
Yeah.
Or, yeah.
Okay, so I get that like she live in freeholds and that means
Mhm.
sometimes like they can age more slowly and stuff. But this is 15 to 20 years later, depending on which books we're talking about.
Yeah.
And nothing's changed, really. They were advancing. There was a whole bunch of things where like, oh, this person's getting, starting to fall to bedlam because they're or banality or both because they're lasting too long. And then 20 years later, they're starting to fall to bedlam or banality. And I'm like, what? Couldn't you have just like made up new names in their brief little description here for the new person who was in charge of such and such duchy or whatever, such duke or duchess or whatever?
Well, and often there was like an heir presented
Yeah,
to the throne or whatever. The most egregious to me was the Duchy of Pewter, where the Duchess is
yeah,
listed as recently appointed, which was like 20 years before time of writing.
yeah.
So
I mean, the most egregious to me is probably King David
that, well, yeah,
because
him too.
they built up this big plot, right? And we did like listen to our episodes on War and Concordia and all that stuff, right? And it's like, oh, he comes back, but maybe it's not him, and he's kind of depressed.
Even as of this book, he had come back 12 years earlier.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I'm not talking about today in 2024. I mean, in like when did this book come out? Was it 2017?
2017.
Yeah, in 2017, he's still. This is not like he went from this dynamic plot to just like I mean, his heir is well old enough now, so that's not that
Yeah, yeah,
shouldn't even
yeah.
be a
She's
problem.
like,
Like
let's do it. Let's move it on. Yeah.
they just kind of froze everything, and like changelings having the whole burn bright quickly, you
Yeah.
know, rage against the dying light like theme of it, and it's just everything's frozen. I
Yeah.
don't like it.
It's hard for me to see how all of these people could not be in Bedlam. Like,
Yeah.
by this point.
You know, you have 2 of them that are still around, cool. But like all of them?
So yeah, they recycled anyone and any jurisdiction that was detailed before, but anything that's fleshed out for the first time feels much fresher. I mean, in terms of
Yeah.
the representation, in terms of the variety of kiths and personalities.
Yeah.
And so there's a stark division.
Yeah. And they could have had the same word count to just advance things a little bit.
Yeah. I guess you could make a broader point about like entrenched leadership, boomers and youths. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know. But my guess is that it was a combination. Like it was either they just wanted to honor the old editions and or just didn't have time to think through
Yeah.
like the changing of the guard.
Yeah.
So
I don't know. I feel like these are pretty creative people here. Like,
for sure.
I think they could have, like, you give them like a few hours, they could do better.
Well, and they did on all of these new write-ups. So
Exactly.
I'm left to think that there was some directive not to change the ones that existed before for some reason, but I don't know why.
Yeah. Well, it's 2024 now, so definitely assume that things
Yeah.
have changed in your books, in your games. I mean, from this book. So,
I changed San Francisco in mine, I can say that.
mm-hmm.
So next up is seeming being decoupled from age.
Yeah.
As a reminder, the way that it used to be was if you were under 13, you were a childling, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
If you were 13 to 25-ish, you were a wilder, and 25 to 35, roughly, you were a grump, with
Yep.
differing starting glamour, banality, and willpower, and this was a linear and inviolable progression.
Mm-hmm.
How it is now is more outlook on the world, where if you're someone who looks on the world with childlike wonder, you're a childling. If you're driven by a sense of adventure, you're a wilder. And if you're wise and considered and watch out for others, you're a grump.
Yes.
More or less. I mean, I'm painting in broad strokes.
This is like book versus internet version. So the internet take on Kith, you're not wrong in what you said, but at the same time, it is still connected to age. It's not slavishly bound to age.
There are tendencies, yes.
Yeah, the vast majority of changelings will progress from childling to wilder to grump. And it probably even kind of vaguely matches the old ages for a lot of them. It just doesn't have to for your character.
See, with that caveat, I feel though most players that I've seen with who like came in with C20 are very happy to have like a 40-year-old
Mm-hmm.
changeling or like a 15-year-old grump, maybe not 15-year-old grump,
Yeah.
but like, you know, are very happy to mess with the seeming age correspondence.
Yeah, and that's fine. I just think a lot of your NPCs, especially the ones who aren't supposed to be special snowflakes, maybe stick to this more.
Yeah.
Like
the more important piece that I think is worth pointing out is that you can go backwards. So you can go from grump to childling even as your mortal age is advancing. And the round table, I think, was really good for getting some background on this change. I forget if it was Ian or Pete who pointed out like how young all of them were when they were reading these, and how to them it did seem like, you know, people who moved on to steady adult jobs had lost some of that spark until they got there too. So so like accounting for 60-year-olds who have that childlike wonder, or 18-year-olds who are certainly are the grump of the group.
Yeah.
I do think it was the right move overall.
Yeah. I do think there was a difference when I got into approaching my 30s though, in my outlook. But there's still changes too, so I mean 3 is probably not enough if you really want to map that. One issue I do have is there's a bunch of new mechanics associated with it. So I do like that the old tempers were ridiculous, right? The ranges. Like, you get 1 point of willpower, 1 point of banality, and 5 points of glamour as a childling. And then if you're a grump, you're like literally by the rules kind of not playable if you don't
You're on Undoing's door.
Yeah. So I mean that I like the changes. But like, so they get new triggers. There's seeming specific things that can gain you banality, and there's certain banality immunities.
Yeah.
And some of the immunities, let's just say this is confusing how it's not clear how some of this is supposed to work to me and to a lot of people who come across this, because we're getting questions and I'm not sure the answers to some of this. Like, what exactly are childlings immune to mechanically?
Depends which page you're looking at.
Yeah. But like some of the stuff, it's like, but you don't gain banality from that. Why are you immune to that? And the grump one is just over the top useful. Like,
yeah.
But banal people are not a concern now, or places.
Depending what kind of game you're playing, though.
Yeah. But then if you're playing the different type of game, then the Wilders are over the top. So it's
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
That's one more knob that this edition provides to storytellers to
yeah.
adjust. I don't know if it's the best one to put into the hands of players.
Mm-hmm. I would more
Hmm.
adjust these knobs. I prefer these knobs not be tied to steaming and more tied to you. Have like something about how to adjust the game.
Or like legacies. I mean, why not just have
Mm-hmm.
legacies have triggers or whatever? Like,
Yeah,
you
that
know.
could work too.
I have a different mechanical caveat, which is just that the consequences, well, not just mechanical and setting, the consequences of a backslide are not described robustly
No.
enough. So, like, it says you can go from Grump to Wilder or Grump to Childling or Wilder to Childling, but we don't really get an idea of when or how. Just, yeah, it can happen, maybe with lots of glamour at some point.
Yeah.
But I kind of feel like that would have repercussions in Cathane society. So, like, what
Yeah.
happens when a grump who's responsible for a bunch of childlings suddenly becomes a childling themselves?
Yeah.
You know?
Or does anybody even know? Like, is it even obvious necessarily to others? Is it like completely obvious on your sleeve? You know, you do a Kenning roll diff 4, you know? Or is it like,
Well, it's obvious when they can no longer resist the banality of high banality humans.
yeah.
And especially with like all of the grump monarchs running around, there's got to be some like solid high councils in place in case they suddenly go childling, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so we don't get any kind of structure around that, which is part of
Mm-hmm.
why there is a Changeling 30th anniversary project on this topic.
Mm-hmm. There is one problem that did exist in the other one, but it's a little bit. It doesn't explicitly say like because your temper could be different. Like Childlings get +1 glamour,
Hmm.
Grumps get +1 willpower, Wilders choose. When you change seeming, my assumption is that +1 changes. It doesn't say that though. So
Oh, I would assume it's just as a starting character. I would say that.
oh, I assume it definitely changes when you change. So that's another.
I okay. I don't know. I assumed that changing seeming would
Yeah.
not shift your tempers,
Yeah.
but maybe.
Oh, it says at character creations. There you go. You're
Yeah.
probably right on that.
To return to your point about the majority of changelings going through the linear progression, I know we've talked a little bit about this too before, but it does subtly change. I guess one of the themes of the game very slightly in the sense that if you are a human playing this game, you are living a presumably linear life where you are aging and
Mm-hmm.
finding your responsibilities changing and evolving over time. To go backwards and jump around in your human life has consequences, much the same way as it would for the Fae. And to
Mm-hmm.
not address those in the game, I feel like that sort of hollows out one of the themes that I see in it, which is like modeling for players how to grow into adulthood
Mm-hmm.
while keeping that spark of glamour alive. And I'm not really sure what to do with that thought. I'm not really sure how to
Mm-hmm.
fan that spark or how to bring that theme
Yeah.
back to the foreground, but I feel like this makes it harder for me.
Yeah. This is also like if you want to talk about the representation, the old seemings, and they sort of kept through what the seemings mean, even if the changes are there.
Hmm.
But like the old seemings, like represented life stages, but like part of that life stage was that you have kids in your mid 20s was the
Mm.
assumption. And that is not, I mean, it was never 100% at all, but like
No.
that is so not. Like I had a kid at, wow, I forgot to do some math here. Anyway, my late 20s, right? And I was super early. Lots more people do not have any kids now than they used to. And I know a number of people my age who are having their first child, and I'm in my 40s. So, like, what does that mean? And then, because I'm thinking, like, one reason to leave Grump would be if you do have kids, once your kids become adults themselves and move out, if that happens, now maybe you go to Wilder or Childling.
Hmm.
Like, that would make sense. It doesn't really lay out any of this, but yeah, more structure around this would be nice, and like how it relates to life changes.
Yeah. Next up, we have some new core kits.
Yeah, these aren't new kiths, but they're new core kiths.
Yeah. It was just a shameless attempt for parody, right? To get to 13 splats like the other
Mm-hmm.
games.
I wouldn't say
I mean,
parody. Uh,
parity, sorry.
parody, yeah.
Parity, not parody, yes.
Yep.
I mean, Autumn She makes the most sense, as we talked about in the
Yep.
roundtable. It was a long time coming. Probably, I would say, followed by Piskies, then Chloricon, then Selkies are admittedly the hardest to wrangle into a game out of the four.
Yeah. Yeah, Selkies would be great. I'm glad Selkies are in this book.
Me too.
It's a little bit weird to me that they're a core kith. Although seals are much better at living in freshwater than their frailty suggests. But anyway, that's aside.
Yeah. It does raise the question again about Kithane versus Gallane and like
Mm-hmm.
the political distinction with metaphysical implications vis-a-vis the Fey
Yep.
realm. So that's not really resolved in this book.
Yep. Do you want to talk about the changes on these three kiths?
Well, because
The
I
tier
mean,
four
yeah,
kiths? Yeah.
or all of the kiths in general, or slash kiths and
Yeah,
houses,
but there's
really.
some pretty extensive Piskies.
Yes.
Piskies and Autumn She are a big difference from what we had before.
Well, Autumn She, I like the new frailty. I
Oh,
mean,
I like it. I said it's different. I actually really like the Autumn She here. It is very different from what we had before
but
for them.
I think it's the most well thought out and
Mm-hmm.
makes the most sense out of all of them. Piskies, I know that a lot of people are down the Piskies. I really like the Piskies here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're just they are very different though from what we had before
Yeah, they're
too.
not Kender. Well,
Yeah.
they're half Kender.
Okay, I like the Piskies way better here.
Hmm.
I still don't grok the Piskies, if that makes sense. Like I'll play the game of like, oh, this person's obviously a boggin, and this person's obviously an Ishu, and this person's obviously like a she. I still don't do this person's obviously a Pisky when I encounter like a real person or a fictional character as easily.
That's because we haven't met yet.
Yep.
Here's my confession. I really like the Piskies because now I feel much less uncomfortable by the
Mm-hmm.
amount of formerly issue-ness that I felt like I had. And now I'm like, okay,
Oh.
Pisky works much better.
Are you now seeing your name changed to Piskigar?
Listen, early days. Um, no, I think the puka-ness will always be predominant,
Yep.
but I really resonate with what the Piskies seem to signify to me, which is like that feeling of you stop at a hostel for the night, you meet a bunch of people, you have this really great time meeting everyone, hanging out, singing songs, whatever, and then you leave and you never see any of them again. And
Mm.
that memory that just kind of lives because it's entirely disconnected from the lives of those people. You've gathered to share this really important moment and then you've all gone your separate ways.
Wait. So Burning Man's full of like 10,000 Piskies plus a few other people.
I mean, probably. Or it used to be, I should say.
It always used to be better.
Yeah. As a sidebar, I was watching, I'm doing a rewatch of Buffy, and in season 1, the cool, hip, techno-pagan computer teacher is like, oh, I just came back from Burning Man. It's like, oh,
Yep.
the 90s. Anyway. Chloricon? Yeah.
Clericon's hard to work with.
They're hard to, yeah.
Why does Irish folklore have a mythical creature that's the bad stereotypes about Irish people? Like how do
Well, I assume the one came before the other.
Yeah.
So, and Selkie's just the fact that they nerfed their birthright in the revision, really. I get that it's
Yeah.
important to have their skin changing be an actual birthright, but still.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, but the Autumn She are cool. I like their frailty. Yeah.
For other ones, I did want to just briefly mention all of the houses, or most of them maybe, are slightly to significantly different, both in terms of their character and in terms of their boon and flaw. The standout one that I wanted to point to is Leonin, who no longer needs to
Mm-hmm.
rhapsodize, although it.
Yeah, I hate that.
Yeah.
There's one I wanted to highlight too. Okay, that's not really bad. They don't need to rhapsodize, and they don't need to do anything in the dreaming. Like
Mhm.
all this plot we had about, like all this description about the house. Like, what is this house now? I
Yeah.
I don't
It's
know.
like throw it away. Yeah.
Yeah,
Dozens of pages that you can just throw away from Book of Houses too.
House Liam
Mm.
has an either useless or broken boon, depending on how you read it. But there's no use. It's not a. It's not a sensible boon.
Yeah.
One glaive reduced mortals banality by one. Do you mean permanent or temporary reigning? Do mortals even have temporary banality?
Yeah. I think that they just have a flat rating and it goes up and down
Yeah.
periodically.
Well, in which case, lowering it by 1 point of glamour is, it's like you
Yeah.
have some draw. Like you spend 5 points of glamour and you've taken an like a banality 9 autumn person to like banality 4.
Yeah.
That's not right.
Yeah, it's again one of many things that could use some additional scaffolding here.
Yep. I mean, it's not like Changeling was ever great for this kind of thing, so it's.
Well, for Leonin, I appreciate that it is difficult to incorporate Rhapsody on the regular into a
Mm-hmm.
game, but there were so many great narratives that came out of it. And
Yeah, and they kept toning it back. I mean,
yeah,
you want to like set the exact level, fine, but
yeah. And they have put it back to like a week. So there's not the after a month, it's every week after that. So it
mm-hmm.
is, you do need to keep doing it very regularly. But it's like, yeah, just dump some background points into Dreamers and you're probably fine.
Yeah, I think I would have done it like you either have to do Rhapsody or Ravaging, and Ravaging's like the weak sauce, like it doesn't
Yeah,
work as well as the Rhapsody. But
something like that. I guess they needed to have room for Celia Leonin as well, though.
it could be Sealy and Ravaged.
Yeah.
Just don't tell anybody.
Doing it all the time, though. Anyway, I also wonder if the other houses, like, how many of them in this edition know about their curse? Because in the old edition, it seems like everybody knew about their big secret.
Mm-hmm. Well, now it's not a big secret.
Yeah. Mm. Anyway, it just kind of.
Also, they made the other thing about Liam. They stopped making him Oathbreakers.
Yeah. Gwydion got kind of toned down. Daron is very different. So, yeah, a lot of these. I don't know. I'm not sure how much of this came out of a desire for some kind of game balance or complaints from players or whatever, but
Mm.
yeah.
I think I would imagine each house had a different motivation for the change.
Yeah, perhaps. On to the next big one.
The overhauled magic system. This is big.
All right, this is big. I've got a summary if you want me to just.
Sure, yeah.
All right. So here's the way it used to work in second edition. We'll leave first edition out of this. Each of the arts had an associated attribute, and your dice pool to do a cantrip, because there were no unleashings in second edition, would be attribute plus realm. If you didn't have a high enough level of the realm that you needed, oh well. Difficulty for a cantrip was the caster or the target's banality plus 4, whichever was higher, to a maximum of
Mm-hmm.
10. Glamour cost was generally nothing for chimerical cantrips and 1 for weird cantrips, plus another one if you were casting it on a particularly banal target, and the range of little modifiers to, the difficulty. Most notably, you had modifier realms, which bumped up the difficulty by 1, but were always quite broken, and bunks, which could get complicated when you had to split your dice pool and stuff to reduce your
Mm-hmm.
difficulty. So even though there was no unleashing, there were various little tricks like counterweaving. If you had Fey 5, you could like directly counter cantrips. And you had nightmare dice that could give you more oomph, but then would cause not imbalance the way it is in C20, but almost like the Echo's flaw, little weirdnesses of
Or
various
or a
strengths.
point of banality or
Or a
dot of
point of
banality.
banality. Yeah.
Dot of banality. Yeah.
So then the way it is now, you roll your art rating plus your realm, and if you don't have the right realm, you can spend a glamour for each one that you're missing.
Although it doesn't give you extra dice, just gives you the.
Yeah. Difficulty starts at 8 with a range of modifiers again on page 194 of the core book. And I think these are like all of the ones that had been mentioned in second edition. It's just all consolidated here. Maybe they added
Mm-hmm.
1 or 2 new ones. The bunks, there are now in a big consolidated list in the core book as well. And the list really, to me, emphasizes how big actions are more or less
Mm-hmm.
equivalent to risky actions. Like the more
Yep.
grand or risky your bunk is, the more potent it is. Glamour costs seem largely the same.
Yep.
And there's no more counterweaving, but now that Fey 5 is more easily accessible, you can do more to directly target cantrips if you wish.
And the bunks got a lot more, at least description on how guidance. I'd say there's more guidance here.
Yeah, in the core book at least, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The big new thing, of course, is Unleashing, which is much more
Mm-hmm.
story-based, and Nightmare is now directly tied into Bedlam mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
More on that later. I also want to note that the old system was regularly house ruled in various ways. So
Yeah.
obviously change needed to happen. And I mean, I had one storyteller who basically just let us buy realms out of order, which I liked. Like you
Mm.
could buy Fey 1 and then Fey 3 and then Fey 2 and then
Yep.
Fey 5. I've seen people waive glamour costs or split dice pools or not split dice pools and just say like, yeah, your bunk, just roll it.
Mm.
Threshold
Yeah.
successes were
They
a
still
thing.
do. There's still people who do that now too.
Yeah.
That's house rules.
So I'm ambivalent about these changes for a few reasons. But
I'm pretty positive on them. for the most part. There's definitely a few cantrips I'm annoyed by the change,
Oh
and a
yeah.
few realm levels I don't.
Yeah, this is not even getting into that part.
Yeah, these a few little nitpicks, but I actually, on the whole, prefer this from what was in the book before.
Well, so like I've said before, my feeling now is that the way dice pools work with art plus realm is that it pushes players towards choosing fewer arts at higher levels and paying less attention to buying realms because you can cheat them
Mm,
up. I also think that it tilts towards like getting heftier cantrips and getting stronger magic rather than building up your attributes. Because
mm,
consider that in second edition, if you spent freebies or experience on attributes, you were getting more power for your cantrips by default. And
yeah,
if you only have so many freebies and XP to go around, you're kind of forced now to choose between bumping your magic up or being well rounded. I'll argue the other side too, though, and say, like, if you're dropping 8 dice on a level 1 or 2 cantrip like you could in second edition, there's not really any risk in that narrative. So, on
yeah.
the other hand, that argument doesn't hold much water once you add in unleashings. So,
Well, unleashings I love.
oh yeah,
Um,
me too.
there's
I do like
so
them.
many costs and risks associated with them, and I've very rarely heard of any characters who ever casually unleash. It's
Hmm.
an absolute desperation move, which
Unless it's the only way you can do magic, and more on that later in this episode.
yes, okay, as a Kithane,
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Changeling, whatever. But yeah, on the whole, I like unleashings because it's you gain nightmare and stuff. It does have a hefty cost, and again, talking about them as if they're optional for your character. And if you get too many successes in it, your ST explosive is supposed to mess with you. So
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, and as a new item, I appreciate them, but just looking at how the core mechanic of cantrips has changed, I'm
Hmm.
I'm about it.
Yeah, I don't. I didn't like the old banality threshold. Was just like too many. It was all over the place.
But
I
see,
didn't like
like
that.
even that, it has to do, and maybe it isn't clear in the second edition book. I'd have to go back and check. But I think the order of operations actually makes it not that bad because it's capped at 10. So if your difficulty, it depends if you say, oh, if it goes above 10, you just can't cast a cantrip on that target at all.
Well, difficulty 10 is a bad thing. You should not use that in your.
But that's before bunks, and that's before you spend glamour.
Yes, but then it would just bring it down from. So if you're like effective difficulty was like 14, and you do a 3 point bump, that's still difficulty 11, which
No,
becomes
that's what I'm saying is you get to
yeah.
10 and then do your 4 point
Okay.
bunk and spend your glamour, and now it's difficulty 4 or 5.
I don't think that was the rules,
That's
but
why I'm saying I'd have to check what the actual order of operations was, but I think.
yeah, I've never seen a table do it that way. Let's put it that way.
Mm,
It feels more. The LARP rules felt more like this in terms of the difficulty, at least, where banality could make things harder, but it was not the be all end all of the difficulty.
I think the bigger issue from second edition was that you had a really steep cost if you were a grump casting a cantrip on
Hmm.
yourself. That was the
Yeah.
the bigger issue.
Well, if I was ever playing a Childling, I'm like, well, I'm only going to cast on
Right.
myself, obviously.
Yep. And the upshot is that in the old system, yes, you did have to spend glamour and do a bunk to lower difficulty in order to regularly impact mortals, but I kind of feel like big deal. I mean, that
Hmm.
makes for a good story. Yeah, you can't
Hmm.
always do the quick and fast and loose cantrip slinging that the new system
Yeah.
enables, but I'm kind of okay with that.
Yeah. And if we're going to talk about general arts and cantrips here, though, besides just the dice mechanic, I do think in general they did a better job with these. Like, most cantrips have uses for all the primary realms,
Mm,
good uses for all of them. There's much more. I mean, we can argue about game balance, but you don't have it where it's like the level two. Was it level two or level three? Like Legend of Main 2 or 3. The thing that's supposed to be about like illusion and stage magic is like the best combat cantrip in the game. Like, you don't have that kind of thing. It's more.
I'll never forgive for what they did to Suze. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, but in general, it does feel more. Oh, I like this art. This fits it. I'm gonna take like a few dots in it.
Hmm.
It's kind of doing like your player. People kind of get what it is without having to go through the nitty gritty details. Like, the nitty gritty details kind of match what you think it's going to do a lot of the time. A lot
Yeah.
better, I think.
I'm purely saying that from a dice pool perspective, the effects that I see rippling out into the feel of the setting, I'm not sure I love. Because
Okay.
I think the old system does make things feel a little bit more World of Darkness, in that it is harder to do magic.
Yeah, this is they did make, especially if you compare this to M20.
Mm.
Changelings are clearly the best in the World
Yeah.
of Darkness at magic.
uh, Mages with time magic are like talking about how tough it is, and Changeling just blows Kronos, and it's like, wee!
Yeah.
Yeah. I do think Cheating Realms was a wise addition too. Although it
Yep.
could be clearer. So again, this is an ambiguity that maybe we need to hash out. If you spend
Yeah.
a glamour, my understanding is that you can bump it up to any level that you need. So if you have
Yes,
Fey
that's what I think
1,
it is.
okay. But there's been a lot of people have questioned
Yeah.
whether that is how it is. So
Yeah. They did make scene hugely powerful as
yeah.
opposed to kind of useless like before. And time,
Right.
okay, time was definitely pretty useless, except for very specific, very
Yeah.
careful situations. Now it's unclear exactly how it works, but definitely useful.
Time to me is just like they took the 5 best homebrew mechanics that they could find and
hmm
put them in. Because I mean, those are all things like, yeah, of course, we used to have time 4 was a
hmm
trigger, and time
Yeah,
2
that
was
makes sense to do, though. I mean, you're gonna.
yeah.
But yeah, that the scene thing. By the way, the thing is, every target within the scene area, you don't need to split the dice pool. It just counts towards it. So if you get 4 successes, and there's 1,000 people relevant target at like scene 5, they're all affected by the scene thing.
Oh, but
So
like the bigger thing to me is scene 3, which is a road.
yeah,
So if you have a hefty amount, not even a hefty amount because you can cheat up your realms. You have prop, you have metamorphosis, you have scene 3. You can change every car on a 3,000-mile interstate into
yeah. I mean, this is confusing because it also says a city block, a lone country road, a city block, a suburban street, a hiking path, an interstate
right.
highway. These aren't the same thing. A city block, first of all, isn't a
Yeah.
street. That's a block. And the other ones
Yep.
are.
It also says stretching as far as the eye can see. So if you do a hopscotch and then cast at the top of your jump, what does that do? So
Oh, this is the arguments about can you target the moon with your.
just one last thing about like the dots breakdown and the freebies and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that issue is only compounded in terms of like railroading players into fewer and stronger arts by the fact that we now do have so many that are kind of siloed. And that
Mm,
so
yeah.
magic in C20, I would say, is much more specialist and powerful than it was in second edition.
Yeah. I'm gonna
Mhm.
say one thing to complain about it, and it's so nitpicky, but I hate it
Oh no.
so much. And it's Primal One, Will O
Oh
Wisp.
yeah, yeah.
This used to let you talk to anything. Now this lets you speak to the world about anything. I hate that. In my games, it is still the old Will O Whisper because this is. I want to talk to the thing. You have a sleeping person, you can talk to them. You have a cat, you can talk to them. You have a rock, you can talk to it. A computer, you can talk to it. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. So what is it now? It's the realm is the subject rather than the addressee. Is that it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So then banality triggers and antithesis. The
Yep.
way it used to work was you just kind of got points of banality from things. And the way it is now, you can still get banality from ambient things, but now various other things cause you to roll glamour, difficulty
Yeah.
8, with a failure gaining you a point of banality and a botch gaining you a point for every one rolled.
Yep. And you have a section that says banality triggers. Unfortunately, not all the banality triggers are in the section, which is better than before, where it just didn't list it all together at all.
Well, very quickly, the list that they give on page 269 is invoking the autumn to resist a cantrip or chimerical effect, failing to overcome a target's banality while enchanting them, which childlings don't get triggered by, willfully destroying a treasure or any other irreplaceable fairy artifact, killing a changeling's chimerical self, which wilders are immune to the trigger, not immune to being killed,
Mm-hmm.
ending a changeling's mortal life, killing one of the enchanted, a mortal dreamer, or kinane, wielding cold iron, or breaking an oath.
Yep.
I'm still annoyed that sentient chimera is not included on that anti-penultimate one. I think it is somewhere else in the book,
Mm.
though. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot. Part of the problem is okay. So being around banal people, not part of this.
I guess because the assumption is you're going to get a little bit from them anyway.
No, it's still a trigger. It's just not in this list. Also, failing to overcome a target's nearly enchanting them. If you look at the enchantment rules, that's not a thing.
I think we talked about this before. It depends if you know how much you need to spend before you try to enchant them.
Yeah.
And if you spend less than you need to, I could see that being what this is referring to.
I hate that rule. That would be a terrible. It's like, oh, sorry, you wasted 5 glamour.
Yeah. What I do like about the new thing though is the antithesis. I think that's like hands
Yeah,
down my
I like having triggers in general too. Like, I think that
yeah.
modulates the glamour a bit better.
Yeah, I think this is overall my favorite system change. I mean, it is a well done and elegant way to make banality more interesting and individualized,
Mm-hmm.
which is and the game needed that, I think. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
quite go as far with glamour. We get more narrative than mechanics about how glamour differs from Fey to Fey, but doing it for banality, at least, that was a great move.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Should we talk about Bedlam?
Yeah,
Or
let's talk about Bedlam. I feel like based on some of the vague chapters here, I think they forgot to have more Bedlam mechanics that they intended to have.
that's possible.
The only way to get Bedlam now is by the Nightmare dice going up to 10, then turning into a balance, and that's your Bedlam mechanic.
Yep.
But based on strict rules as written, I would recommend like Bedlam triggers, roll banality, gain some.
Yeah.
That could work, or some other thing.
Aren't
Yeah.
you are you working on Bedlam triggers? Is that a thing you were working on?
Yeah, I have some of my things. I have it worked out. I think that's pretty good. Maybe I guess I could play test
Mhm.
it more. I guess, but that'd be the like. My suggestion is I went through a list of the old warning signs, figured out sort of a rough thing that would make
Mm.
sense. Not all of them would translate this, but like sort of generally that vibe. And then okay, if this warning sign would have applied, roll your banality, difficulty 8. If you fail, you gain a nightmare die.
All right.
I think it's pretty simple and maps to the thing here. And I think if you add that, it works pretty well. It's not as punishing or not punishing because it was unclear before, but it would still definitely, you can't spend all your time in the freehold. You can't not have any mortal associates. You can't, like you have to live a mortal life kind of, or else you're going to start getting nightmare dice. And then because of the way nightmare dice work, I like it because if you're careful and you're not like taking any nightmare dice, you'll still gain some nightmare that way. And then every time you're using like your glamour rolls and cantrip rolls, that'll start spiraling up anyway.
Yeah.
So
Until I was reading through this again, I had forgotten how easy it is to accrue nightmare too. Like
mm-hmm.
you can rack up the nightmare pretty quickly. Just
Yeah.
every time you botch a glamour or a cantrip roll or unleash or roll tens on nightmare dice.
It's just my problem is that shouldn't be the only way to gain Bedlam. It's just
Yeah.
you.
Well, and something else. So, do you have the list from second edition handy by any chance? If you,
Here we go. Do you want the warning
yeah,
signs?
let's have them.
So these are the ones that are listed. Your glamour is higher than both your willpower and banality. I wouldn't use that one. You spend more nights in a freehold in the real world. Okay, that can turn into a trigger pretty easily.
Is the first one though combined or not combined?
Doesn't say.
Okay. Either way for childlings, but
Yeah, you spend more nights in a freehold than in the real world. Spend more time. You spend all your time in freehold. Bedlam's almost assured. You have more than one fairy treasure. You interact with more than 3 chimera on a regular basis. You are a constant ravenger. You have no mortal friends. You have no mortal jobs or other attachments such as school. You almost exclusively nocturnal. You drink alcohol or use drugs or have sex to excess, whatever that means. You spend more than half of your waking time creating art of some time. You have no mortal family. You have no mortal possessions. You are in a state of unrequited love.
and it's the suggestion is that if you have at least 3 of those, you're going to start down the path, correct?
Yeah.
So notice how many of those focus on mortal connections in particular, which
Yeah.
is something that is completely lost from the redo in C20, and that's a big problem.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, another question. The instructions for marking imbalance in here, is it the first willpower that you spend from your pool or the last one that gets you the Bedlam threshold?
The last one.
Okay, that's what I thought, but it's like mark it over the left as the pool is spent from left to right.
Yeah,
It's
and you're
like
supposed to spend it from the right.
that's
Yeah.
how I've
They
always done
didn't.
it, but it's like
That's yeah. I think it explicitly. I think I went through it and explicitly says it, but it's like in one little
oh,
place.
no. You mark an imbalance by circling the rightmost willpower box, which is usually to me that's the first one that I would spend when I'm like marking on my
Yeah.
sheet. So
Well, I'd usually spend the leftmost.
see, like that, yeah, that's
Player's choice.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, I get that people wanted more solid mechanics around Bedlam. I'm just not sure that this was the answer, because it seems very fiddly and mechanical for something that I would rather just have be narrative.
Oh no, I hate that as an STR
But
player.
I like your idea. I like the idea of Bedlam triggers. That I can be convinced on. But even that, that's much less stuff that I need to track. Because once you start making it like tracks that interact with each other and pools that go up and down depending on dice rolls,
Yeah.
then it becomes possible for someone to try and game that engine rather than just here's a situation that may trigger you. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, I wrote up like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 triggers and sort of put the situation where they could come up, and then it's like, okay, you roll the thing, and then maybe you get a dot of nightmare,
Yeah.
and then that's fine because now your nightmares, and now you're just tracking a thing you're tracking anyway. So,
Which makes more sense to me, specifically for dreaming, because I compare it with something like
mm-hmm.
Clarity and Changeling the Lost, or maybe like the Madness track or whatever in Call of Cthulhu. And in those games, that sort of creeping threat feeling feels more appropriate than it does here to me. So, anyway.
Yeah. Oh, I think we said before. There's a nice,
Yeah.
there's more details about how the mists work and stuff, but
Which is great because thematically, I want all of this to be grounded in losing connection with your human self rather than just getting recklessly drunk with glamour. Even if the two
yeah.
co-occur, like that duality theme has to be role played rather than gamed. That's going to be my soapbox statement for the episode.
Okay, now we're gonna go next to our favorite parts of this book,
Uh,
starting with Fontaine.
I've got two quotes, comparative quotes.
Mm-hmm.
So here's how the Dantean were described in second edition. They are changelings who, unable to handle the reality of the Fae, fled to the safety of banality. Their perceptions twisted by their own fears, they are among the active forces of banality and attempt to hunt down any changelings they can find. And then in the Autumn People, they laid out 6 types, which were the Lost, the Cursed, the Black Magicians, the Nihilists, the Apostates, and the Typhoids, each of those coming to banality in a different way, respectively ignorance, vengeance, power, hopelessness, heresy, or infection. So in C20, the quote is some Fae awaken wrong. Sometimes the chrysalis twists and claws, leaving the Fae soul scarred and the human mind broken. Sometimes the soul is damaged long before its reincarnation, bringing its scars and fractures through the cycle of rebirth. The dreaming should have destroyed these hopelessly damaged souls, but instead spits them back out into the world, incomplete and deranged. They're also said to be born of trauma and torment, which kind of sounds more like Lost now that I think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine this change might have been made because people often forgot that Dantean had like glamour ratings and could use cantrips even if it was unconscious, and they were inconsistently presented in terms of their level of awareness.
That depended on the doom as to what the level of awareness would have been to the.
Yeah, and then the Dooms have the same names but are quite different.
Yeah.
Nihilists are probably the most similar to the original, but then all of the others are like significantly different in terms of what they represent.
Yeah. I'm just gonna flat out say like I would X card or whatever refuse to play in a game that uses this. Like it
Yeah,
is. I find it highly offensive, and it makes me angry to contemplate this in a game. Like
yeah.
I want nothing to do with anything that uses this. I find it offensive, and I kind of look down a little bit on anybody who plays with it. Like that's, and I'll play a Thaline game, no problem. This just bringing this into the game, I find terrible. Like I
Yeah.
really makes me angry, like on a real level.
Yeah, because also the original Dantean, purely from a narrative standpoint, they were compelling villains because they mostly chose their path, either out of mistaken logic or greed, or they were corrupted by outside forces.
Mm-hmm.
But that opened them up to have like redemption arcs and
Yeah,
understandable motives and influence
and
on
this is
others.
this is saying it's they didn't choose this, but you're a bad person for having it done
Right.
to you. Like that is so offensive as a concept.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The implication that trauma damages someone beyond repair
In a moral, but makes them morally corrupt.
and dangerous to others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah.
So yeah, do not like this change.
No.
The very first fleshed out Dantean antagonist we got, not counting Anton Stark, was what's his name in the Immortalized trilogy, and he had so much dimension because of the way it
Yeah.
used to be, and now it's like you could not make that character.
I would have preferred they just left Dante Note entirely than what they have here by far. But
Yeah. Well, I would have preferred the old ones.
exactly,
Yeah.
definitely.
Anyway.
And I mean, you can mechanically you can bring it back pretty easily. Like the ruin art's not. I think it's reasonable.
Yeah,
C20
I mean, it's,
translation.
it's fine. Next up.
The inanime. So this is different. This does not make me angry. This makes me sad. And
Yeah.
I think they tried to do a good job with this, and it just didn't
Yeah.
land.
I mean, conceptually, they're almost the same in
Yeah,
that
yeah.
they're Elemental Fae, Crofton and Gleedling, etc. But mechanically, oof.
So what's the mechanical difference?
Well, the biggest difference is that their magic, the slivers, can only be unleashed, which means they're going to rapidly accrue nightmare, which means they are rapidly going to become imbalanced. And since epiphanies are one of the primary ways you remove imbalance, they are limited in the epiphanies that they have. So they're rapidly going to sink into bedlam.
Mm-hmm.
It also means they're going to rapidly use up their glamour to do any magic, which they can't easily replenish for the same limited epiphanies
Mm-hmm.
reason. You have to always be harvesting. And then they invoke the weird every time they want to do magic, even if they don't necessarily want to.
Yeah.
So
And they
yeah.
get the whole risky ST messes with the.
Yeah.
It's not good.
The slivers also seem more confined and haphazard in terms of their power sets. I mean, it's not like
Mm-hmm.
the originals were very cohesive, but yeah, I don't know. You get like a couple random specific examples that don't seem to hang together very well for each one.
Mm-hmm.
So the end result is you get to fire off 2, maybe 3 spells before you're out of juice, and then you're probably
Yeah.
halfway to imbalance in the exchange.
Yeah. I think in here you could house rule them as NPCs only to make them like the pre. I mean, you just use them like the other book, and you get
Yeah.
enough sort of setting details for them as NPCs.
Unless you're playing a dreaming game, perhaps. Like that, if you're playing a game that is specifically going into the dreaming, especially if you're going to the Anonymous homeland,
Mm-hmm.
they're a little more functional in that space.
Yeah.
But again, that kind of gets away from either that or a game that's like set deep in nature near a glade.
Mm-hmm.
But both of those scenarios are kind of secondary to the core themes of Changeling, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like, I don't necessarily think players should be rushing to play Kubera or something, but why go to the bother of including them and systems for them if they're going to be
Yeah.
such rarefied cases?
Well, I mean, there's sort of the same problem with the Cien, just they never. At least an anime did fit in Changeling in the previous edition.
But the Xian, I feel like, can fit. They're their own self-contained game played
Mm-hmm.
separately. Whether or not that's a good idea or a bad idea, they function internally. These are very hard to make work.
Yep.
So,
So hopefully somebody will do something about that.
yes, stay tuned for the Changeling 30th anniversary project next season.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I'll just point out quickly is that the birthrights and frailties are kind of a mess as well.
Yeah.
Mannequins, it's like, oh, here's another thing to spend a lot of freebies on. Enjoy that birthright.
This makes me wish that we had. Okay, so we get the C20 player's guide. We'll get to later, which was mostly new stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? Maybe things that had been hinted at but we never really got rules for before, or completely new things.
Mm-hmm.
I wish we had like another book, like basically Thaling on,
Yeah.
or most of this other stuff. I wish it had its own book that was fleshed out properly, and even if there wasn't their own books, but like if you got like a chapter on the anime, that could have been a lot better.
Mm-hmm.
Then they could have given them slivers that actually work.
Yeah. So now we go to the last 2 items, which are both of the items in Appendix 2.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start with enchantment. So the old system.
Yeah.
The old system was very simple. Give a mortal a token, put 1 glamour into it for each day you want to enchant them.
Yep.
Admittedly, as I think it was Charlie pointed out in our roundtable episode, this makes enchantment really easy, and with the overall increased glamour
Mm-hmm.
presence of C20, it would be goofy.
I don't think it'd be that goofy because they still have to. They also was the enchanted stroke, which
And
was
the
like
Dolorous blow,
Dollar Stroke was made. It was like it's calling upon the weird on your sword, and then
something like that,
Enchanted
yeah.
Stroke was like you swipe at someone and they're like enchanted for a scene.
There's also Quickie enchantment, where you just spend a point and roll glamour versus banality, and it's like for however many turns.
Yeah, Was that in second ed or only first ed?
I think it was first. I think it was in the Enchanted.
Yeah. But I like the token thing because it doesn't, and maybe they could have made the token a little bit, but there's no token anymore, first of all, and I love the token.
Yeah.
You have to imbue glamour into like food you're making or an item you make. If they drink or eat the thing that you made, they're enchanted for that long. If they hold on to like an enchanted item you made, they're enchanted for that long. So,
Yep.
and I'm cool with making enchantment last a while. I don't get why that's a.
So the way it is now, all right. Temporary enchantment takes glamour equal to the target's banality plus the number of days you want to enchant them. And
Mm-hmm.
if they have any treasures that they might want to use, some of the glamour that you put into them might get wasted on that. But so your average
Well,
mortal,
except if they hold a treasure, they're still enchanted for as long as they hold
well,
it.
yeah, but they can't power it necessarily. All right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so your average mortal will require 7 glamour to enchant until next sunrise, plus more for however many days you want to keep them enchanted.
Yep.
So that's option 1. Option 2 is the Ritual of the Parted Mists. This used to be a Kinane gift, but now it's a ritual, which requires 20 glamour plus a roll of stamina plus Grimaire. So, like, what's the average dice pool for
Mm-hmm.
stamina plus Grimaire? Like 4 dice?
Yeah, who's going to take a lot in both, right?
Against a difficulty of banality plus 3. So, again, your average mortal, you're starting at difficulty 10, and failure gives everyone a dot of banality.
And also can only ever be done once.
Yes, the mortal gets 6 glamour, which they can never refill, and this can be spent on bestowments to use up the glamour more
Yeah.
quickly, but also banality, they get erodes that glamour, and then they can never be enchanted
Yeah.
again, forever.
And to me, like the whole point of enchantment mechanics, like not the whole point, one point of it is for having non-changeling player characters in your game. You just
Yeah.
can't do that now with this, with either of them.
Yeah. Again, in the roundtable, someone, either Charlie or Pete, pointed to this as an overcorrection, and absolutely.
Yeah. This book is full of overcorrections. This is one that most of the overcorrections, I think, were a slight overcorrection. Like, I think it's closer to hitting the mark than it was before, but maybe they went
Yeah.
too far. This one, it was just a way past.
Yeah, there and all of the close to the mark, the dozens or maybe hundreds of those are not the ones we're talking about in this episode,
Yeah.
but this one stands
Yeah.
out.
And it's also funny because it's like, this is the one depowering thing I
Yeah.
can think of.
Yeah, and I mean the Parted Mists, like I can't see any occasion when you would use this ever.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe for like a single epic short story and then that's it.
Yeah,
But
and like they get powers from a thing that makes them not enchanted.
oh, they're terrible.
Yeah.
Like the powers are things like, oh, get -2 on your intimidation rolls, or spend 1/6 of the glamour you will ever have ever to stun someone for a single turn with your intimidation.
Yep.
Like, I think also this change seems so egregious because mortal interaction is supposed to be one of the core pieces of the game, and this just cuts that off at the knees.
Yeah, you're supposed to have she with like a whole bunch of enchanted.
Yeah.
Part of the thing that like is going like why you don't have the levels of commoner servants that you'd think you need for sort of this kind of she hierarchy or whatever is enchanted mortals fill in a lot of the gaps. I mean, so do Chimera, but
well, and now Kinane, I guess.
So. Okay, do you want to move on to Kinane?
Well, before we get there, I want to just emphasize again that I think this edition has moved away from interacting with ordinary mortals in a way that I find disappointing, I guess, because enchantment was like an alternative to Epiphanies and Autumn People that added a lot of depth to the game, and now it's just this mix of impossible and useless. So it kills a lot of great stories. I mean, there are whole chapters of options in the Enchanted, and it's just, how do you do that now? Next to the Dauntain change, this is probably my most disliked change in the core.
I still think this is like bad as opposed to angry. Like, it doesn't morally offend me. It's just bad.
Yeah.
But yeah. Next, Kinane. So this kind of went the other direction.
Remember how I said the enchantment thing was my most disliked change next to the Dauntain? I think I'm going to take that back.
Well, okay.
No.
Kinane, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, enchantment. The old enchantment rules, I just bring back whole cloth.
Mm-hmm.
I don't 100% like the old Kinane rules. I like them way better than these rules. There's tweaks I want to make to the old Kinane rules. These are what?
So once again, here's how they used to be for anyone who didn't play second edition.
First edition, actually. So the only reason that
Yeah, first and second. So Canaan are mortals related to changelings who get special backgrounds, most notably fairy blood, which they start with a dot of automatically,
mm-hmm.
and unique powers called fey gifts, one of which was parted mists, but then there were others like talking to the dead or battle
Mm-hmm.
stuff, the warp spasm of Cuchulainn. They could also have fey marks, which were like flaws. They had starting tempers equivalent to their fey seeming, but could only regain glamour through enchantment and rapture. They
Yeah.
don't need tokens for enchantment, but they still have to be enchanted, and they can be enchanted for a lot longer. They also don't start with arts and realms in second edition unless they spend freebies on them. But if they do learn them, the level is capped by their amount of fairy blood, and they're cautious about using them due to not having much inherent glamour.
Mm-hmm.
So, they're a lot more incidental to fey powers and fey magic in that setting. But given how much the earlier editions kind of leaned into mortal connections, I feel like they
Mm-hmm.
fulfilled a lot of story roles in there. So, how they are now, they are basically permanently enchanted, but unaffected by banality, with a rating of 3.
Sort of permanently enchanted because they store 2 points of glamour and only 2 points. They regenerate one
Yeah.
per chapter.
And get a birthright.
Well, that's I think they hit that before, didn't they? As a some way.
Well, you had to spend points on them.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
You
you
get a
spend
birthright.
freebies. Now it's like if you're a she kinane, you get 10 freebies of appearance.
Completely immune to the mists, which is like what?
Yes. Free dot of an art and 2 free dots of realms. And fairy blood, you're quite easily able to expand on those.
And the fairy blade just increases how many other arts you can buy, which, as you said, like this game kind of encourages focusing on arts and realms. Well, arts or realms doesn't matter. And even if you took no dots in it, you can be really good at that one art. So, but you only have 2 points of glamour per chap. Anyway,
I mean, take chicanery. Who cares? You don't
yeah,
need glamour for chicanery.
yeah.
And the question I'm left with is like, why would you not play as these? So you start with fewer arts and realms. Big deal. Spend your freebies on them. You never have to worry about
Oh, and
banality.
plus it's way easier to get draws. So you can keep
Dross,
a lot of
yeah.
draws with you. Yeah,
Take advantage of the fact that most Kithane probably aren't going to have high rates of actor to affect you. Like, it's
yeah.
so easy to be a broken character as a Kinane. So
Yeah, so like there's a few things in the original Enchanted I would tweak, but like this is just silly and not.
I'm a little bit softer when it comes to the story side because the write up at least does seem really invested in finding them a role in Changeling
Mm-hmm.
society, largely the one formerly held by the Enchanted.
Yeah,
And the life stages piece where they point to like as they age in, not in parallel but not in step with their Fey relatives, that's
yeah,
a really interesting kind of set of stories that you can tell. So mechanically they're ridiculous, but
yeah. If they made them mist resistant and maybe they get waves of getting their own glamour, not by just making it, but like they could do epiphanies or something.
well,
Like,
they can do Rapture, presumably. Well,
yeah,
actually, I don't know if they still can. In the old edition, they
no, they
could,
can't.
but
They can't have their glamour is just 2 points, and they regenerate one per
that
maximum.
regenerates. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And also they don't have a glamour rating, so I think they automatically fail all banality checks.
I
Anyway,
don't know. I don't want to go down that road. I'd even say they would probably work as their own game, which is
mm-hmm.
usually what I say for the various groups of Gallane too. It just sucks to have the Kinane be in that bucket.
Yeah, I can think of. Yeah, they're not. It's the immunity to mists.
Yeah, like even changelings aren't immune to the myths.
Actually, it doesn't even say what happens when they run out of glamour. Does that mean they're not enchanted anymore? It doesn't even. If you want to take this literally, it makes no sense because they don't actually say they're enchanted. But
What does it say that they can perceive Chimera in the Fey world? Or
no, it doesn't actually say that.
hang on, it's got to be in here somewhere.
I think it's implied, but it just doesn't say it, which is another. I think somebody came into the discords at one point for saying, it only actually says that changelings take chimerical damage, but
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I'm like second guessing myself. Oh man, this is a mess. Mechanically, it is a mess.
Yeah. Obviously, they're supposed to, like, nothing about the earlier part makes any sense, but it doesn't talk about if they're permanently enchanted or when they run out of glamour if they're not enchanted anymore. It doesn't say that, but it's only two. Anyway, it's mechanically a mess regardless. They
Yeah.
need a glamour rating, and they need to not be totally immune to the
Oh,
mists.
oh. All right, I found it. I found it.
Yeah.
So on page 456, once the magic takes hold, which seems to be in infancy, Kinnin can be identified immediately by the wellspring of glamour released as the newborn's magical heritage asserts itself. With this comes a full view of the world, mundane and chimerical, the problems of which are self-evident as soon as the baby starts crying at nightmare creatures or chasing chimera.
Hmm.
So it's very, very subtly woven into
It's
the
just they can
discourse here.
perceive. Doesn't say they're enchanted, but that's a whole other.
Well,
Yeah. Anyway, it's not well described.
yeah. Again, maybe an overcorrection for.
Yeah.
So, of all of these changes, I think, like I said, the banality triggers, hands down my favorite.
Mm-hmm.
Including the new core kits, I'm on board with that. Some of the others, I'm okay with. I think they changed the tenor of the game in a substantive way, but
Mm-hmm.
I can live with them, like the magic system, having fragments of the Dreaming's Heart, I'm fine with. But then the Dauntain, the Enchanted, and the Kinane are really frustrating to me.
Yep.
So,
Now the Dante and the Enchanted and the Kinect. Okay, the Enchanted bit's really bad because that's so important for the game or the setting.
yeah.
But we get nice things. They included like a whole bunch of stuff, not the whole thing, but a whole bunch of things from Dreams and Nightmares.
Oh,
I
yeah.
like they expanded on the Trods a little bit from Dreams and Nightmares in a way I like.
Yeah, there's plenty of little things. There's a lot of consolidation that I'm happy to see in
Mm-hmm.
the core book. And with that consolidation came a lot of alignment and polishing and
Mm-hmm.
cleaning up, and that's great.
Yeah, the crafting rules aren't bad.
Yeah. Bedlam could have been done better. Seemings being decoupled from age, yeah, fine. I just wish people would think more about what that
Yeah.
results
I
in.
think we needed more on it. Would might be the way. But like, if you think about Changeling, before we got the Enchanted book, which was a weird place to put about Seemings.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Again, stay tuned for the Changeling 30th anniversary project next
Mm-hmm.
season. But those are the big ones. And I guess
Yeah.
we've talked about the overview, we've talked about the new stuff, we've talked about the changes, and
Yeah.
hopefully all of these hours of talking about the C20 core book are sufficient for anyone
Yeah.
who's
I
coming to
have
the
a
game.
question for you, Puka, about C20. When you run a game of Changeling the Dreaming,
Yes.
what edition are you basing it on?
I mean C20. Like
Yeah.
at this point I'm okay with that being everybody's default. I think in the transitional phase it was a little bit not frustrating, but
Mm-hmm.
just like as you know, as I've held forth about in relation to Demon the Fallen, when people come at me snarking about how such and such a thing that came before is like broken, or like when people say, oh, the old edition was so bad because it did this thing
Mm-hmm.
differently, I never feel like the newest thing is necessarily the best thing. It may
No.
be a different thing, it may be just as good, but part of what I think we've shown through this podcast is that there's still so much from the older books that is so
Yeah.
useful and can enrich the new edition.
Yeah.
So, yes, I use C20, but with bells, with little
Yeah.
additions.
For me, C20, for my purposes, is the best core book to run a game from for me.
Hmm.
That's with some. There's a lot of caveats there. Like I'm still doing other things from it. There's really good supplements from previous editions, but like the base rules, the game of Changeling I want to run, it has fewer house rules if I start with C20. It's probably the best way of putting it. So
That's fair. Yeah.
if I was doing C2 or C1, I'd be adding a lot more house rules. A lot of them are just in this C20 core book, so
I think that's true.
it's too big.
It's too big.
I mean, we also like Mage, so it's not.
So, while that's true, I would also say that the C20 games I run, I tend to fiddle with the knobs as much as I can, and I do think C20
Hmm.
provides an adequate number of them. So, like, I tend to run glamour poor games, and I think C20 supports that as well as it supports glamour rich ones, even if by
Yeah.
default it skews towards the latter. So I will accommodate that as well. But all that being said, as a book, it is a kitchen sink book, and second
Yeah.
edition in and of itself is so tight and streamlined, and this is also tight and streamlined, but also has like 150 more pages than you need.
Yep.
So
I think having the deluxe copy that I backed with the 3 ribbons, and it
you
really
really
helps
like
me.
those ribbons.
Yeah, I love the ribbon. It really
Yeah.
helps me because, like, if I'm looking things up and it's like I only really need 3 things to flip back between at a time, and then it's like way easier than using my fingers.
Yeah. Ribbons of the Dreaming's Heart.
Anyway, we had some questions, but I think we've addressed it both, including Chig's trolling. We see you, Chig.
We appreciate all comments and questions.
Yeah.
Thus endeth.
Yeah.
So, Josh, if listeners have other questions and comments for future
Yeah.
episodes, what should they do?
Well, they can email us, podcast@changingthepodcast.com. Best place is on our Discord, discord.me/CTP. They can leave a comment, and more people are doing that on our YouTube channel for Changeling the Podcast. They can also leave comments on our Facebook page for Changeling the Podcast. Also, send us a toot, changelingpod@dice.camp, or leave a comment on our website for the episode, changelingthepodcast.com. Oh, or go to our Patreon for Changeling the Podcast. You can interact with us there too.
And links to all of these will be provided in the show notes to this episode.
Yeah. And once again, I'm Josh.
I am the core book change known as Puka.
And remember, if you are mad at the dreaming, it means you're a horrible broken thing that's irredeemable.
Yeah, well, dream strong. If you've secured a non-deluxe copy of the Changeling 20 core book, you may be dismayed that yours doesn't come with fancy ribbons for marking pages. But fear not, for the ribbons of the Dreaming's Heart are included by default in all printings of the tome. The expression of these in the Autumn World is that phenomenon of opening a book and serendipitously arriving at the exact page you needed, even if you didn't know it was the one you were looking for. The core book seems to be especially subject to that experience, and honestly, it's one of the more helpful changes to this edition. We're less enthusiastic about some of the other updates that we didn't mention, such as the chimerical watermark on page that, to enchanted eyes, contains a mystical compulsion to create a podcast about the game. By the time we noticed it, it was already too late, and the best we can do is redact the page numbers so that others don't fall into the same glamour-soaked trap. Nevertheless, here we still are. Our continuance is partly enabled by the support of our patrons, who get a shout-out at the end of each episode and include Derek, Dorcadus, Ellerus, Hugo the Bogperson, Iabol, Jason Vines, Oreo, Roscaboose, Sandchicker, Sija, Terry Robinson, Tricerabeth, and Victor Torre. You too can sign up at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast to help us keep the lights on for bringing you Fae-flavored content as often as we can. Other encouragement is also welcome, whether you tell others about our show, click like and or subscribe on YouTube, stop by our Discord at www.discord.me/CTP for some chit-chat, or leave us a review on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience. As we hurtle through the remainder of the 20th anniversary edition, we have many plans and plots to unfurl, so we hope you'll stick around to witness them, until which time it remains only to say, keep on dreaming.